I'd like to thank Michael Nugent and Tony Flannery for those words, and arguably probably one of the most civil theological debates that's happened in a long, long time. So with that, we now move to the floor. The speeches will be 7 minutes in length. There will be one gavel bang like this, with 1 minute warning left when you have 1 minute left, and two like this when your time is up. POIs will be available to be offered. Those can be 15 seconds maximum in length. And once again, I would hope that everyone will be inspired by what they've heard here today and maintain a certain civilness about the ensuing discussions, because I understand that these motions can get quite heated, they can get quite intense, but we'd ask that you attack ideas and concepts and not people, and stay civil. And once again, if you proceed to attack others or say anything that might be construed as offensive to someone within the chamber or without, then I will give you one warning before asking you that if you continue that behaviour, that you'll be asked to leave the chamber or sit down, depending on the severity of your infraction. Also, on that, just one final point. When referring to previous speakers, we would just request that you try to maintain, to the best of your ability, some level of gender-neutral language by referring to them as the previous speaker, as opposed to you're one over there, or her, or she, or him, or it. You know, so we'd ask that you, we'd ask that you maintain as gender-neutral language as possible while within the chamber. So, with that, unless there's anything else, I would like to invite a speech in proposition of the motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Yes, indeed.
O'Rourke, mature student, arts. I listened with great interest to the debate, and I have great sympathy with Tony. We were growing up in Ireland, and I'm 67, so I'm not that far behind you. And I've gone through a lot of different ideas about God and its existence. And when I was growing up in the Midlands, there was always this fear of God, because you didn't do this, you didn't do that, because of hell's fire, because you go blind to masturbate it. There were so many no's, but there was never much of the do's. And we all believed in Santi for a long time. And I'm fully convinced now that God is the adult version in some places of a Santi. It's this faith that we believe in to give us comfort. But as Mr. Nugent said, we have to use our brain and think. And think about this figurativeness that you talked about, the Bible, and all of the difficulties that the Word of God has caused all around the world as we know it. Never mind the cosmos and the universe. Let's talk about this world. This is where we live. We're rarely going to go, like, we're not like your man in the Virgin thing, what's his name, get a trip to the moon to be looking down on us. There's very few of us here. Maybe some of the people of the first generation here will get to go outside our universe, but most of us are here. And the example of different cultures and their idea of God, and what's happening in Myanmar, which used to be Burma, where the Buddhists are now in cahoots with the generals, and they're getting rid of decent people because they're not of their faith and they're a different sect. Now, we were always led to believe, as Catholics, as I grew up a Catholic, that Buddhism, it wasn't one of us, but they were nice people and they were decent and everything. But I was not Taiwan, but Thailand, a number of years ago. And it's extraordinary what's going on. The people are under the pressure that we were under here with the Catholic Church. Tithe giving, look after the priest, give a bullock every year to keep the parish priest in a new car. All of this sort of thing is gone. That's going over there with the Buddhists now. And then we have the Muslims over with their God. But there is no common purpose of love and generosity and common sense with this God. And as far as I'm concerned now, and I've worked my way, like yourself, through a lot of this, I've come very close to Mr. Nugent's situation in looking at and living through what we went through in Ireland, and looking out into the greater world, and travelling to America and seeing the amount of religion and God and gods and the divisions. And then you see other cultures that have a very much less God figure, and they're much more harmonious, there's much more social justice, and there's less of this fear factor, because we are going through life as animals, maybe the higher animal, but we come in and we die, and what we do here is important. So I would like to support the motion. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for those words and invite a speech in opposition to the motion that this House is welcome to the death of God. Yes, in the middle of the front.
Hi.
In fact, please.
My name is Gemma and I'm studying psychology and I'm in second year. For me, I guess, I believe that everybody has a gift or soul or spirit within us, in the sense that we all have something to offer in the world. I think God gave us all free will. The people have freedom in the way we act. We can do what we want to some extent. And it's how we treat each other that creates badness and goodness within the world. I think God is good and gave us all a unique gift to use in this life. And he gave us a purpose, and that can be shown, say, through our work life or through a job. I think God is good, but perhaps it's the people and the way we treat each other and the choices that create pain. I think a lot of behaviours such as greed, materialism, envy and jealousy create pain in life, and it's the choices in life that we make. I think there's pain from rules.
That's it?
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. But
Please stand when you give your away.
I'm guilty an engineer. You look at all the stuff that's going on and you see people dying in childbirth, and I just don't get that whole thing that he gives us this chance, because it's so cruel. He's no mercy if he is real. It's like you look at children getting malaria and things, and I just don't. He's not very fair. He's giving anyone a chance.
I guess there's always going to be struggles in life, and I guess God made life to be a challenge. He didn't make it easy.
It's not a conversation. If you want to make it a speech, you can make your own.
Finish now.
I'm just going to finish mine. God is good, but perhaps it's the people and the way they treat each other and their choices that create pain, greed, materialism, envy, jealousy, etc. are choices in life. I think pain is from rules and that people make. We should have more love, kindness and compassion for each other. I think all people have wounds, and there's not such a thing as bad people, but they have wounds and pains within themselves that need to be healed. I think power and authority rules create fear, and fear creates pain in our world because it creates hurt. It's greed and materialism, desire to be better than your neighbour, that can create pain and upset. But for me, there's a place we go to live forever after we die, and there is no more pain as we leave behind the pain we gathered within ourselves throughout our life. I guess when we die, I believe our souls all come together in love as we leave our pain behind. I think a lot of pain can come from emotions driving actions, be they positive or negative. But ultimately, we are all connected and we all have love within ourselves and are connected to loving God. So I guess ultimately, I believe sometimes it can be down to the people. But I guess as well as that, there are some things that we have to question, like what he said. So thanks.
I'd like to thank you for those words and invite a speech in proposition of the motion that this House is welcome to the death of God. Yes.
Stephen said, first year of the law. Dr. Montgomery mentioned the word wonderful in relation to the idea of God and religion, and I recognise that for some people, religion and the idea of God is wonderful, and it brings positive things to life, and for them that is wonderful. But we have to acknowledge that it comes at the expense of pain for so much others. Religion and the idea of God has been used to justify this pain. If we look at the past, particularly from this country, there are numerous scandals and horrific stories that we could use that have been in relation to the idea of God and religion. But what I want to focus on right now is what it's doing now and in the current pain that this idea of God and religion is causing. And in particular, just as one example of the many negative consequences of this idea, I want to focus on the consequences for the LGBTQ plus community, because it's something very personal to me. So if we look at the basics, the Bible says, and now shocker, I'm not very religious, but the Bible says man shall not lay with man, and that line in the Bible has led to so much pain. We look at America right now. Queer children and teenagers make up high numbers for the homelessness numbers in the States. They also represent high numbers for the suicide rates in the US. And one of the main factors of that is because gay children or lesbian children, bisexual, transgender, are kicked out of their homes, sometimes by their parents, who use the idea of God or religion to justify that action. There's also another extreme to that, which is the epidemic of conversion therapy, where certain queer children will undergo horrific methods that are not in any way scientifically proven, that include electrotherapy in certain circumstances. Again, I'm not saying by means that this is, it's a religious practice, but it's justified by this idea of God. This are the extremes, and then you also have to look at it that even here in Ireland, LGBTQ plus children growing up here, if they're brought to mass, it's not necessarily, I'll openly admit, it's not necessarily shoved in their faces that, you're sinners. But the church have never said, they've never put that part of the Bible aside and said, no, it's fine to be gay. They've never dismissed that. So they'll always grow up with that idea that something in them is wrong, and they're sinners, and they're going to hell. Like, that's what this idea puts children through. And then all of these concepts are in the Western world. Like, I haven't even begun to mention what happens in the Middle East or certain African countries, where the idea of God is used to justify throwing people of a certain sexuality off buildings, or whipping people in public because of their sexuality. And then even if you take a different aspect of it, justifying the rape of women, locking women in their houses. Again, it's all justified by this idea. And it's not necessarily written in the sacred texts that, women can be raped, but it's justified by that idea. And I think that, yes, as I said earlier, it can bring a lot of positive to people's lives. And faith is great for some people. It really is. And I know many people who have found so much in fulfillment from their faith. But is it really worth it? Is it really worth it to watch? Yeah.
Do you honestly think that people that are bigoted against LGBT individuals would be any less bigoted if they didn't have God as an excuse? Because there are places that are pretty homophobic regardless.
Mm-hmm. I accept that it's not necessarily all because of religion, but you can't deny that this homophobia and the practices that I mentioned earlier, you can't say that that's not mainly based around religion in general. It's just not, because again, they come from religious backgrounds. The conversion therapy was set up again by people who push the idea that your gay children are going to hell. You need to save them. It's pushed by their religious argument. And even now, we have this new liberal pope because he looked kind of grumpy in a picture with Donald Trump. But even he said that transgender people are the annihilation of man. He's reduced the punishments for certain priests who are paedophiles. Is that as progressive as we're going to get for the Catholic Church? I don't think that the idea of God and the idea of faith, while it can bring so much positive things to people's lives, justifies the endless amount of pain that so many others have to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I would like a speech in opposition to the motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Yes, just at the back corner there. Yes. No, just above you. Yeah. No,
yeah, I just wanted to mention there are a few points that I noticed that a lot of people are talking about. One is the opposition of religion as opposed to God. I actually agree. I think religion has caused so much hardship and so much pain and so much suffering in the world, and that is religion as opposed to God himself or herself or itself. So I would like to point out that the death of God, it would not equate to the death of religion, because if God is dead now and we don't know it, religion is still here, and religion is really what certain priests are saying. That's where the issue lies in a lot of places.
On that point?
Yep.
Please stand when you're going to
But when they say the death of God anymore, the idea of God, and religion doesn't really make sense without the idea of God in some way or form.
Yeah. So the idea of God exists anyway right now, and religion is based on the idea of God that some people believe and some people do not. But we're saying the idea of God, I'm now saying that if this idea of God dies as God, as if it's actually a pure entity, if it is a physical thing, if that dies, the idea of God stays, here. We're saying we're not debating the existence of God, I don't think, because that's, as you pointed out, is a very futile thing to do. More so the death of God. So say I'm in second year science, so I'm studying evolution, I study chemistry, and it's still very confusing as to how life came about and why, when it comes down to it, chemicals act in the way they do. So you could argue that there is a consciousness, there is something controlling that, but we're not actually talking about if that exists or not. We're saying if that were to go. So if there was a consciousness, would I welcome the death of existence, of evolution, of procreation, that kind of thing? No, of course not. So I would be opposed to the death of God. Thank you.
Just apologies. So in future, when standing up and making speech, please give your name and faculty. Apologies for not doing it. Please. So with that, I invite a speaker in proposition motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Yes, front.
First year arts. I'd like to talk about the idea of God in the sense of the mystery of the universe. I feel that often the great mystery of the universe is attributed to God in all the glamorous ways, in the way of the evolution, the human eye, and the things that we can't explain. But I have breath after that. I experience the unknowable mystery of the universe once every morning and most nights. The unknowable mystery of the universe is such a crucial part of my everyday life that I don't often think about it. I'm of course referring to my bicycle. Now, I'm going somewhere with this. I will keep it short because a lot of you have listened to my previous speeches, so I'll take the glasses off, make things a bit fresh. My bicycle is my means of transportation to and from university. That's not to do with God. the bicycle is an odd thing, because if anyone wants to offer a POI of this and correct me, because it could have been sorted out, bicycles defy all reason and logic, and their existence is an affront to divine creation. And what I mean by that is, you can pump bicycles out of a factory and they can work, but building a bicycle from scratch is notoriously difficult. There is physics involved, there has to be. There has to be mechanics involved, there has to be engineering involved. We know these things just logically have to be involved. However, most veteran bicycle makers and designers will tell you that what they look for in a new applicant is not a knowledge of physics, not a knowledge of engineering, it's intuition. You can't write down on a page a guide to building a bicycle. No one. You can write down a blueprint for something that already works and pump it out of a factory, but if you were to give someone the raw materials to make a bicycle out of scratch, there is a very specific way to make them that it's not easy to explain. It's a constant ongoing debate with science where they kind of trying to figure out what makes a bicycle work. Ultimately, they don't have much. And I don't believe that points to the mystery of God. I believe that that points to a great and noble mystery that I'm not quite smart enough to delve into. I prefer to just cycle my bicycle. If I'm cycling it and I start thinking really hard about what is a bicycle really about, who knows, the wheels could come off. Just in many ways, it's the same with us. If we start thinking about, what is the consciousness that drives, ultimately we don't know. Just like we don't know what a bicycle really is yet. I don't know how it works. I probably never will. But we need to suspend. This excuse to give faith to an all-powerful being. And as a society and as a people, we need to go forward and just chill out and ride the bicycle, Thank you.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that speech and making all mechanical engineering students question their path of career. So with that, I invite a speech in opposition to the motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Yes, just indeed.
Jordan again, corporate law. A lot of great points have been made, I think, on both sides so far, but I want to talk a lot about the ones made by the affirmative of the motion. First of all, to the actual gentleman, Mr. Nugent, you give a great deal of evidence as to why there isn't a God, and to how we might believe that this idea of a God is wrong, and how that's not actually what's out there. But I ask the question, why does that matter in this debate? Because although we may not know what God is, maybe there isn't a God out there, but there is a value to the idea of having a God, regardless in society, and that's been touched on a lot throughout this debate, but I kind of really want to solidify that, because you, in your speech, mentioned a lot about this idea of journey for truth, and to actually seek the ultimate truth. But in that journey, I think you missed the truth of the point of having a religion, or having a God in the very first place. I mean, the ideology itself comes with benefits. I mean, many people today, in this debate so far, have talked about the value to an individual, the value to a people, a nation, that a God, or an idea even of a God, brings. And I think to just ignore that, or to pretend like that isn't actually a part of this debate, is to really miss the point of actually having an idea of a God. Another thing is that I felt a lot of the ideas proposed by the proposition are more to the death of ignorance. We don't really want the death of God, we want the death of ignorance. And I feel like there's a very big difference between the two. Because eliminating God as a possibility kind of just puts us in the position to discredit the next idea that comes along. Because if it isn't God, it's going to be something else. Because there's a big question. Where do we come from? How do these things all just appear in the way they are? If we say it's not God, well then that gives us the reason to move on to the next solution. And I feel like we'll just do the same thing over and over again. So with the solution we have right now, there is a value to it. There is an idea that this does bring, it does have an inherent worth to the people who actually follow it. And the idea that, with the rationality that society is healthier, I kind of question if it is or not, because I think each man is entitled to have the choice of whether or not they implement this in their life. I mean, each man should have the choice whether or not they follow God. And for us to say we welcome the death of God, it kind of takes the freedom out of man's ability to live life how you see fit, and to actually chase that idea of a truth. And another thing, they keep bringing it back to the idea of using this idea of God as a justification. Now, that I kind of find a bit questionable, because if you look back through history, it's not always religion that's been brought back as the justification for these cruel acts. And the fact that people are using this justification means that they already have the idea. And that was touched on, and I actually really like that, to be honest. I think it was Thomas who brought that. The idea that, yes, people are using this as a justification, but that's not because they got the idea from that. It's because these people already believed in this. Now, the example was brought up against people not agreeing with homosexuality. That's all well and good, but that's not to say that people got this idea because it's written in the Bible. It's because people feel this way and they say, I can put a face to that idea. I can bring a actual persona through the Bible to that idea that I have. So to say that all these problems we're facing comes from this idea of having a God is wrong. It's just that it gives people a reason to think what they're saying is right. And if it isn't this, again, it'll be something else. So rather than attacking the idea of God, I feel like it's better to attack the idea of the racism we have as a product of people, not God. I mean, yes, it does say that to lay with another man is an abomination. It actually does say that, but it also says love thy neighbor. So you can take all these in half, and you can take half the side of the coin, but to ignore these other fundamental truths that are with that, I mean, it's not God that's telling us to rain down on man, it's man taking this and doing something completely different with it, you know? So the idea that we should just follow rationale, even though this idea of religion gives us comfort, and to ignore that, I mean, I feel like you're missing the point of actually having a God, or even the idea of a God. So really, the whole basis of my speech boils down to one thing. It's that the value of God doesn't come from the actual idea of God. It comes from the comfort that it brings to people and what people can actually go and do with that. So, thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite to speech a propositional motion that this House is welcome the death of God. Yes. Name of that, please.
Sean Gannon, first name. Okay, just to start off, I remember when the opposition speaker was saying it first, he started off his speech wonderfully with like how the universe is a wonderful mystery and whatnot. But then, I mean, is it not a broad oversimplification of just to say, oh, well, you know, behind it all is like a god or some sentient force? I mean, where's the complexity in that? I mean, it's just like, in the end of it, if you ask me, it's like finding out these things. I mean, the only thing that's really real is the journey and just a bit of discovery for all those scientists and whatnot. But, I mean, just to say there's a god, I mean, it kind of just kills the whole thing. I mean, like, you look up at sky, there's lightning, it's just like, oh, well, that's God, or what gods, or whatever. But I mean, no, in reality, it's a bunch of particles hitting off each other. I can't remember the exact science, something to do with nitrogen. But even then, I mean, you were saying that, like, creation is constantly happening, and that's wonderful. Well, honestly, to take a pessimistic view, in reality, it's not creation all that's happening, it's destruction. Eventually, all stars burn out, particles break up, and eventually the universe goes to heat death. That's where all matter is just a cloud of vague radiation, and there's nothing left, not us, not anything beautiful, nothing, just, I said, nothingness. So, I mean, science, it says it's going that way. It's just, it's the way energy works, breaks down, friction happens. So, I mean, that doesn't seem too wonderful in the long run. But now just talk about, I mean, I want to start off as well saying that, I remember someone saying that, like, religion, God, different things, but I mean, without the idea of a God or gods, there is no religion. So, I mean, the death of the idea of God would probably lead to the death of religion in general. So, I mean, I don't think you can talk about one without talking about the other. And with religions, I mean, religions always, they can start off as interesting ideas, bring people together, whatever, but they always become corrupt. I mean, people use them to go get power and bring their own ideas. I mean, religions always gravitate towards power in the end. And the biggest problem with this is, I mean, you see, a tyrant may one day have to... Yes?
What's the single biggest problem you think the world is facing due to the threat of Jainism these days? Jainism. What big...
Not a conversation.
Okay, I don't know. I haven't got a clue. Jainism. Some other time. Where was it? Yeah, so, I mean, so I was saying, a tyrant may one day have to answer to people, but I mean, a pope only has to answer to God. I mean, that's always been my problem. I mean, you can all, they can do whatever they want, but since they're God's vassal or whatever, I mean, they don't answer to anyone.
On that point, sir?
Yes.
Isn't God...
Please stop being repealing.
What? Isn't God within us all, though?
Just talk on the bigotry and whatnot. I mean, I know you can say that no matter what, those people always have the ideas, but I mean, not everyone starts off in the world necessarily completely bigoted against whoever or whatever. I mean, but when they're brought up in religion and whatnot, and they're convinced that whoever's gay or a different religion are literally evil and they're a threat to the universe, I mean, what do you think's going to happen? I mean, of course they're going to become bigoted, and the people who just enjoy it that way or get some pleasure out of pushing other people down. I mean, they'll just use it as more justification for themselves. Yeah.
But don't you think?
Please stand
Okay, stand. Would you not think though that the corrupt ideas were taught by a community, say a priest in a religion, in a church, and that's what breeds the bad ideas and the sexism and the racism and stuff, as opposed to just simply believing in God?
Yeah, I'm not saying that just because you believe in God, you're going to get ideas beamed into your head. No, I'm just saying that when ideas like that can get associated with a religion, it's very easy for them to get people to believe in them very easily, because, I mean, when something is divine, you don't question it, usually. I guess not anymore, but, so, my point being is like, so someone can easily bring up their idea, and if they say it's in the Bible or whatever, I'm not saying that it was just because you believe in God, you automatically became evil, but when you believe in God, and your specific God says such and such things, then, I mean, you're probably going to believe in that.
As well, I was just saying.
Please wait to be accepted and stand for making the POI.
Sorry. Okay, now finally I'm just going to go on to the origins of how we ever came up with gods and whatnot. Now this one's a bit interesting in my view. I remember hearing this theory that at one point our brain worked a bit differently in much earlier form of human. Now the point is that, you know, when you have a thought in your head, at the time you couldn't recognise that those thoughts may have come off as like outside, and that may have translated inevitably to the voice of God in your head. It's just a theory, but I've always thought it's interesting. I'm just saying that that's gone now. I mean, usually you don't hear the voice of God in your head. I mean, if you do, I'd say you should look into that. But so I mean, we've come a long way since there. It's just also, I mean, it kind of also into like how there's an inherent desire of humanity kind of to think we're special, because, you know, we kind of dominated the planet so quickly and whatnot, and we just had to assume that there was more to us. We done just, you know, a bunch of complex associated with chemicals and whatnot. So I mean, it's a bit disheartening for a lot of people to just think that at the end we're just nothing but matter. So I'm just saying, these are all they're early human ideas. I think to truly grow up as a species, we need to abandon those ideas. I know that religion can bring comfort and whatnot, but I mean, to abandon it is to broaden our horizons in the long run and find comfort in other things, more logical things. So my overall point being is just logic trumps God. Yay.
I'd like to correct that speech. And just a point of clarification regarding POIs. When making a POI, please stand, raise your hand, and say something along the lines on that point, and wait to be accepted. Have that POI accepted before making your point, in which case you have about 15 seconds to make your point. If the person if the person doesn't understand what the POI is, they can ask for a point of clarification on that point in future. And we generally just ask that you keep the POIs kind of short and brief and to the point. So on that, I'd like to request any speeches in opposition of the motion that this House is welcome to the death of God. Yes, in the corner of the place here.
Good evening. My name is Josiah Burke, final year of Commerce. There are two things I wish to say before I begin my speech. Number one, I argue in opposition to the motion, but I'm not a Roman Catholic. I believe it's a false religion. It's one that's a creation of man, deliberately crafted to turn people away from the truth that's found in Scripture. And the other thing I feel I must say is in reference to your own caution to us at the beginning of the session. I know it's not in relation to this to this motion. But I do feel to say that this is a house that stands for free speech. And I am very disappointed to hear that. I just wrote down here, I don't know where it's coming from. I'm not involved in the Little Dead, but I have stood here many times over the last few years. And I'm disappointed to hear that coming in.
Can I offer quick clarification just there?
Just let me finish and then you can.
I'll make clarification now. Regarding the free speech issue, regarding the letting people speak, we accept that everyone has the right to say what they want, but we also respect our right to not have to listen to you. And when you proceed to say things that insult others or offend others within this chamber, we have the right to not to listen to that. So if you do insult others and not their ideas, but feel free to attack whatever you want, but just not individuals within this chamber. But if you do, then we have the right not to listen to that, and we can either remove you from the chamber or make you sit down. So on that point, just clarifying that for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. You spoke about offending people. You said that we would be asked to apologise and to stop if we offended people. That is dangerous. It's a complete capitulation to political correctness. And I will say to you and to your committee, you should be ashamed of yourselves. The motion tonight says that this House, it does not say that this House believes there is no God. It says that this House would welcome the death of God. We begin on the premise that God exists, but we would prefer if he didn't. Therefore, tonight's debate centres not on the existence of a God, but on man's antagonism towards his creator. The motion tonight is not atheistic, it is anti-theistic. There are many who call themselves atheists. They advertise themselves as such, but when in reality, when the flaky layers of profession are peeled back, you find not atheism, but anti-theism. They hate God. They hate his claims upon their lives, and therefore they devote themselves to the eradication of God from society. Not at the moment, thank you. This antagonism towards God, this hatred of God, this objection, this violent opposition is as old as time itself. 3,000 years ago, King David, wrote in the Psalms, in the scripture, "Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break his bands asunder and cast away their cords from us." Truly there is nothing new under the sun. Before I make my case for the opposition, however, there is an important clarification that must be made. I've just spoken of the rage against God. But the great question is, of which God do I speak? If you go to your local Educate Together national school, the word God, quite deliberately, is a mass of contradictions. Hinduism itself has 330 million gods. As Aristotle once said, man makes God in his own image. So when I speak of the rage against God, of whom do I speak?
On that point, sir.
No, thank you. There are almost 1 million Hindus in the United Kingdom. I ask you, is there a rage against them or their God? No. There are close on 50 million Muslims in Europe. Is there a rage against them or their God?
Point of order?
No. In fact, the Canadian Parliament has just passed a motion that calls on politicians to condemn anti-Islamic behaviour or rhetoric. Ladies and gentlemen, there is only one God that the establishment hates. There is only one God whose death is pursued with a vengeance. And that is the God of heaven and earth. It is the true God. It is the Creator. It is the God of Scripture. It is the God of Christianity. And the great rage of which I speak is directed today completely against Christians and their beliefs. And nowhere is that more evident than in this very university. In a moment. This the university, right here in NUI Galway, saw fit to lavish praise on the Islamic Society of NUI Galway. They gave them an award at the Societies Award, which they are entitled to do. Not to mention, also, the 2 dedicated rooms that the Islamic Society has exclusive access to on campus. On March the 14th, 2014, a small group of students from the Christian Union set up a table at the bottom of Smokies. They were peacefully advocating for a no vote to the same-sex marriage referendum. The table was attacked and destroyed. The Christian Union was ordered by the authorities to leave the scene. They refused. Their material was forcibly removed, and shortly thereafter, the society was disbanded by the university authorities, and 4 of its leading members were completely disbarred from all society involvement. Today, there is no Christian Union on campus. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what inclusion and diversity looks like.
Pointer.
I wish to quickly paint a picture of the world without God. It is an intolerant world. For in order to kill God, you must outlaw and suppress all those who believe in him and profess his name. It is a cruel world, for where God does not exist, neither does objective morality. It is a hopeless world, for where God is removed, life must necessarily become meaningless. Take France, the most atheistic country in Europe. 200,000 people attempt suicide every year. But despite the best efforts of man, God will not die. Many have attempted to eradicate him. Many have attempted to stifle Christianity, as they do today in this very university, but they will fail. And finally, my last line. For truly, as God sees man rebel against him with sound and fury, in the words again of King David, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. I urge you to oppose this motion this evening. Thank you.
We would ask that once speakers have reached their time limit, they begin to wrap up their speech as quickly as possible in the future. So with that, I invite a speaker in proposition of the motion that this House is welcome the dead of God. Yes, that'd be back there. Very good. No, sorry. Yes.
Thank you. And I'd like to say that our scientists have told us that energy...
do you have a name faculty, please?
Oh, I'm not a faculty. Yeah. That our scientists...
Name, please? Name, please?
Siobhan, I said. Yeah. I was saying our scientists have convinced us that energy cannot be created and cannot be destroyed. And so if we're to kill God, he'd need to be physical. And if he's not physical, I don't think we stand much of a chance. I think too that we need to understand spiritual realities if we're to understand the concept of God. We also need to remove ourselves from the imperial religions and the influence they've got on us. Also, we need to practice creative, analytical, and free thinking. Our miseducation doesn't prepare us to understand God. So, really, we're like feeling in the dark. The monster, schizophrenic concept from the Old Testament that fights for the Jews, he double-crossed them with the Nazis anyway. However, to disprove that that person is a hoax or doesn't exist, I don't think that's proof that there is no God. Words like gravity, nature, instinct, evolution, I don't think that's proof either that there is no God. We've got a universe, we've got life, we've got a whole lot of things going on. And I think these things are still to be understood. presently it would be, well, I suppose it's unfair to ask a crab or a shrimp to explain it all to us. And I think it's pretty much the same where we're at now, in that perhaps in 50,000 years, a million years, when we've evolved enough, we'll have a better concept of the subject. But right now, I don't think we do. And there's a lot to learn, but I don't think it's fair to say there is no God. But I think it's fair to say that Moses and his rod, Jesus dying for our sins and such the like, are concepts that needs to be looked at a little more carefully, because they're flawed. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite a speech in opposition to the motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Yes, just in the middle there.
Michael David Law. So, full disclosure, I am an atheist, but I oppose this motion. I don't think that we should welcome the death of God. Not God itself, but the idea, the concept of God. Because I think that even if God doesn't exist, and I don't think God exists, the idea of God is something that inspires us to think. It's something that motivates us to consider what's going on around us. And even if it's not there, it's a good starting point to get people talking about what could be there. Mr. Nugent raised in his speech that religious societies are unhealthy societies, and he cited a few examples. Now, in my opinion, that was kind of conflating correlation with causation. I don't think that a religious society is necessarily flawed or corrupt, inherently anyway. Ireland is a society with a rich heritage, a rich religious tradition, a rich legacy in theological discourse. And I think that getting people talking about God from an early age, even if you eventually come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist, as I have, because as I said, I'm an atheist, it's a good way to get kids debating about the meaning of life, the universe. Why do we exist? Why are we here? What are we doing? What's the purpose of it all? And that exposure to abstract philosophical concepts instills in young people a deep, profound understanding and appreciation for what's going on in the world, and a desire to learn more. So I think that even if God doesn't exist, I still think that the idea of God is a great way to start debates. It's a great way to get people interested in theology, and it's a great way to inspire young people to start discourse about theology and philosophy and ethics and morality. Now, I will also say that by believing in something other than ourselves, I believe that we are in a way believing in ourselves. I believe that by believing in something like a God or gods inspires us to believe in ourselves, because we have to have faith in our own feelings and our own experiences to believe in God. So when you believe in God, you aren't really believing in God, you're believing in yourself, because you're trusting trusting yourself enough to believe in your own conscience. A lot of things in life that we experience cannot be rationalized with empirical evidence or scientific discourse, and many people have tried to turn this debate into a science versus religion thing. But the thing is, science can't explain everything. It doesn't necessarily explain why, even if it can explain how and what and when and where. So there are plenty of things that we experience in life that we can't explain using a scientific lexicon, but they still happen. You know, for example, love. We feel that love exists, but we don't know that it exists. Father Flannery brought up, that there was a woman in his life who he cared deeply about. He knew that they loved each other. He couldn't prove it or verify it. He couldn't apply a scientific examination or a scientific evidence to it, but he knew that it was real in his heart. So, I don't believe in God, but I do believe that it's important to start debates about God, and I do believe that the idea of God is important, and that's why I believe that it would be lamentable for the idea of God to no longer play a role in theological discourse in our society, because I think, really, even though I don't believe in God, the reason why I want the idea of God to stay around is because I like the debates. And I like seeing people get riled up. Okay, maybe some of them are a bit homophobic and racist, and maybe, you know, but it's still interesting to see the debates.
Yes, I take that point forward.
If you gave a speech earlier not allowing people to attack others, I would urge you to criticise the speaker there for doing exactly that.
That's fair. I would ask you to remove that remark, that you take back that remark, that you level that another speaker earlier. Otherwise, I would have to ask you to sit down.
This illustrates the nonsense of this movement.
Okay, I retract.
This illustrates the nonsense.
Okay, I retract.
This young man has to apologise now.
Okay.
We would ask that you refrain from speaking as well, as it's not your turn to speak.
I retract the statement.
Thank you.
Got it, okay.
Thank you.
So, okay, sorry, I did take that a bit far, but I don't think that the speaker in question is racist or homophobic, but I do personally believe that the speaker's points were racist and homophobic. That's how I should have phrased it.
I would ask that you take back that remark as well.
But I'm not asking him, I'm attacking
Yes, point forward.
Hi, you said at the start that attacking ideas, perfectly okay.
Yeah,
attacking points, pretty much the exact same thing.
I'll let that one slide, but we'd ask that you don't attack any speaker any further.
People that voice racist and homophobic opinions are assumed to be racist and homophobic.
Thank you. But again, I'm not going to go into that more because that's just going to go down a whole other rabbit hole. So we'll continue. I don't think that God exists, but I think that it's nice to have debate, and that's why I think the death of God would be a bad thing, because I like having the idea of God around, because I think it's a great way to get people talking about philosophy. Thank you.
The speech, and like a speech and propositional motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Yes, the white. Is this a point of order? Would you like to make, if you want to make a point of order regarding the actual, like, the procedure within the chamber, I'd ask that you specifically make that, rather than making a point about another speaker.
No, about his points that he mentioned.
Oh, about the speech, about his speech.
Yes.
Is this a point of order about his speech?
Yeah.
Point of order. I thought that's just if I'm within my speech within my speech, that's where the point of orders will come.
That would be a point of information.
Okay.
Yes. Would you like to make a point before? Is this a speech?
Yes.
Sorry. The individual below. Yes.
I just wanted to say that his point about how all the rage is all to Christians, which is widely incorrect. If you can see all the Muslims in the world that have been going through problems, and which I have experienced myself, going through war in Libya, and seeing stuff with my own eyes, I can tell you that you are widely incorrect. Say all these terrorist groups such as the Islamic State, the Taliban, and all the other ones that are unknown. They're all sponsored by who? Where did they get? Yeah, they kill people, but where did they get the money?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia.
Oil?
No. I think you're out of order by now. This political speech we made off the or off the subject.
Oh, I'm going to count this.
It's not. In my view, it's not a point of order. She's coming. It's a political speech.
It's not relevant to the topic of question. It is a speech against political, but it will be counted as a speech in proposition to this motion. We'll move on to speech in opposition to the motion, and then go back to the original speaker for proposition. So, if you want to finish up as quickly as possible and somehow tie it back into the relevancy of this motion.
So what I'm trying to say is your point about how everything, all the rage is towards Christian, and how the Christian views are wrong or whatever, that is not true, because this happens to every person, and it's not exactly just religion, it's people's views.
Point of information. And is he referring to just within the university there's more anti-Christian than anti-Islamic? Just within the university?
Maybe. But just because there's more people who are involved actively in the Islamic religion doesn't mean there aren't many Christians. It's just people aren't bothered to make a Christian union, and it's not that hard. Just because there was someone who decided to get involved and spread the word of Islam doesn't mean that the Christian religion isn't around, because I see it with my own eyes. That's my point.
I'd like to thank the speaker, and in the future, if anyone would like to make a speech like that, I would ask that you refrain to either keep it to another motion, make a PMT about it, and start all the events, but I will be taking that as a speech in proposition of the motion and move on to a speech in opposition of the motion. So do we have any speakers in opposition of the motion? Yes, just at the front.
Second Arts. So I suppose I just want to preface this speech by saying, personally, I don't believe in God. I never have, even from a very young age. I've always sort of questioned his existence. Like, I would go to mass and, you know, just listen to what the priest was saying and just not really buy it. So yeah, sorry, I made notes, but I'm just like, a lot just happened there now. I think the purpose of the idea of God is to sort of explain a lot of like life's unanswered questions, you know, like where do we come from, our creation, what happens to us after we die, what's our purpose in life, and you know, for most people, like, God answers that question, like, we go to heaven, like, God created us, like, you know, and you know, you can disagree or agree with that, whatever, that's fine. And some people use this idea of God to sort of push their own agenda in like negative sort of ways, as like was touched upon by many people who were in proposition of the motion to welcome the death of God. You know, to discriminate against people or to police the way people choose to live their lives. And I agree that that is wrong. You shouldn't use the idea of God to push your own agenda. But I would like to talk about just the general idea of God, regardless of what religion or, you know, it falls into. I think overall the idea of God can be something very positive in some people's lives. Even though I don't personally believe in it, it offers people a lot of comfort. It offers people a direction in their lives, a moral compass. You know, the idea that someone up there is looking after you and has a plan for you, like, that's very comforting. And even though I don't agree with that, I would advocate for taking that away from people, and I wouldn't welcome the death of that idea, because I think if you take away like organized religion or people using this idea for negative purposes, at its whole it's very pure, and it's just another way of looking at the world, you know. I'm sorry, I'm probably not making very much sense. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing to believe in God. If it has a positive impact in your life and you treat people with love and respect, and you know, taking that away from people could be devastating for them. So I suppose that's why, as someone who doesn't believe in God, don't really think it's a bad thing to have an idea of a God, and I wouldn't really welcome the death of God. So.
That speech. I'd like to go back to the individual with white there at the back corner for their speech in proposition.
I'm not in favour of the death of the idea of God or any specific God. I'm in favour of the death of the word God, the three-letter word, because it's such a vague word that anyone can attach their own meaning to, that everybody is arguing either for or against the death, but everyone has a different idea of what it is they're arguing for or against the death of. So we had one person describe God as love, but I'm pretty sure most atheists believe that love is real. Does that make us theists? Or someone else described God as this consciousness that's in everyone and goes back. You can be an atheist and believe in that. Someone described it as the adult version of Santa Claus. Someone described it as us ourselves. So do atheists not believe in themselves? So the actual word God is the wrong word. I think when he made the point at the start that your disagreement is more about terminology than the substance of what you were both talking about. I'm sure you do have disagreements about the substance, but this idea of a general spiritual other worldly thing that gives meaning or that gives help to people, or that might have been an energy that created the start of the world. You can be theist or atheist, you can believe in that. But then some people use God as a definition of a man in the sky, lightning bolts in his hand, who really doesn't like gay sex. And the reason I don't like that definition of the word, the reason I don't like the word God is because it puts people together who shouldn't be together, and it puts people against each other who shouldn't be against each other. I think Father Flannery's definition of God is closer to Mr. Nugent's definition of the universe and reality than it is from this person's definition of God. And so I think because any meaning can be attached to the word is completely meaningless, and in that sense there is no God. But yeah, and another thing I'd like to make about religion. Religion is something separate from God. Religion is institutions, a community and a culture built around common beliefs and rituals. Buddhism is a religion. In some Buddhist sects they do believe in a God, in some they don't. The fundamentals of Buddhism is about cycle of death and rebirth and trying to achieve enlightenment and transcend the universe. There's no need for God in Buddhism. There's atheist Buddhists, there's polytheist Buddhists, there's theist Buddhists. So religion can exist independently of a God. And religion in general, like the word God itself, can be twisted, interpreted, manipulated in so many ways that it is also basically, I won't say meaningless, it's meaningful. It's meaningful depending on what you get out of it or what interpretation you have. But how someone reads the Bible is more reflective of what they want to read out of it than what's actually in it. So what I would propose in general is that people who might be spiritual, whether they believe in something that they call a God or that they call it consciousness or that whatever they want to call it, or they just admire the universe and the beauty of it but are completely scientific, they get that sense of appreciation and spirituality and they gather around that, and then the people who want to be doctrinaire and illogical and homophobic and oppressive, they can go and do their own thing, and whether or not we call it God should not matter. And I think what we need to focus on isn't God or religion. Religion, as I said, is just rituals, common beliefs. As Pascal made the point earlier, the Jains are a religion. As part of the Jainist religion, they believe even plants have as much of a life as animals. So they won't eat potatoes because you're killing the plant to get they don't eat fruit that falls from the tree. Their version of terrorism is meditating a carrot to death. So religion per se isn't the problem, is hierarchical structures within these communities, these religious communities, which allows people, well, men mainly, almost always, to take advantage of people's need to know about the world and sell it back to them to get some sort of control over them. And it's not necessarily religion or God we should be focusing on, it should be these hierarchical structures where people are put in charge of other people to push their own agenda. And for that reason I'd like to get rid of the word God, because it puts someone like Father Flannery in the same boat as someone like Ian Paisley, and it puts someone like Michael Nugent in the same boat as Joseph Stalin. Maybe in their own life, Father Flannery might be a Paisleyite and Mr. Nugent might be a Stalinist, but from what I have gathered here today, it doesn't seem likely. And I'll give you an example. There was a Christian society in NUIG recently called Jocus, I think it was, and they focused on prayer and spirituality, and they did nothing too political. Go on.
Thank you for giving me down where I think way to. And that wasn't for any particular reason. There is a society, you're right, called Jocus, but there is not a Christian Union on campus. The Christian Union adhered to the scripture, to the traditional, historic explanation of Christianity as according to the scripture. Jocus do not. That is the categorical difference. I just want to make that absolutely clear.
Well, I would argue, and as Father Flannery said, most Christians now see the Bible as metaphorical, as allegorical. And you will accept as a Christian, and I'm not a Christian, was an old covenant and a new covenant, and that the rules changed somewhat, you'll also accept that a lot of Christian scholars believe that the reason man should not lie with another man was because they needed to reproduce at the time to build a nation, and that was a specific rule for a specific time. So there's many different interpretations. You can read the Bible and gather from it what you want, but the Joka Society focused on letting people interpret it their own way, the spiritual side of it. The Christian Union Society that was around before that got disbarred because there's posters being put up that said homosexuality leads to paedophilia and bestiality. And that, I'll let you...
That's not true. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue.
Well,
I could argue. I can say a million things, but my point of information is simply that that's just not true.
Well, if it wasn't you, somebody put up posters in your name with that on it. And I won't get into a back and forth about that now, but there's a lot more to the story than I think you're letting on with what happened in that. And in that, when that table was pushed over and the guards were called, there was 300, sorry, I'll finish now. There was over 100 people sitting down, respectfully being quiet and giving you turns to speak and having a debate and a discussion. And then when you left, there was guitars going around, there was LGBT people talking about their struggles and how much they loved each other. If that's intimidation, I'm fine with that.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and invite to speak in opposition to the motion that this House be welcome to the death of God. Yes, just in front.
Just to preface, for what it's worth, I consider myself agnostic. I really have no vested interest in either the...
Just point of clarity, just name
Oh, sorry, Kevin and first year civil law. Anyway, I consider myself agnostic. I really have no vested interest in either side of the debate, whether religion stays or goes. To me, and I suppose that this is just my opinion, religion is much like philosophy, in that religion can inform people on a way to view the world, and they can live by, said, religious philosophy. Of course, that has led to some terrible people doing terrible things, like the previously mentioned really genocide currently taking place in Southeast Asia by extremist Buddhists, the Islamic terrorists in the Middle East, and of course even extremist Christians over in America. But at the same time, religion has also motivated people to do some great things, such as the Reverend Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, or even Padraig Pearse. And while these are controversial figures,
Point of order. Or kind of information, how can you bring Padraig Pearse?
If you're making a point of information, you wouldn't mind please standing.
Sorry, Aurora. I lost the run of myself there when I heard Padraig Pearse. How can you bring him into a piece when he died as a sacrifice and a blood sacrifice, and his whole raison d'etre was to have a blood sacrifice to keep a revolution going in Ireland every century? So,
sorry, can you clarify there? My hearing's not great.
Padraig Pearse, you said, yes, as an example of a good Christian. In my view, he wasn't.
I'm not arguing whether Padraig Pearse was a good Christian or not. What I am saying is that Padraig Pearse, at least partially, was inspired by Christian doctrine and Christian philosophy into what he did. Now, we can argue whether what Padraig Pearse did was good or bad, but I feel that's completely off topic. So I'm going to move swiftly on now. Anyway, as we've seen there, these are all controversial figures. But I feel a lot of people would agree with me and say that, at least for the first two, what they did is fundamentally good. In the current day, again, I don't think a lot of people would disagree with me. We live in a time where alternate opinions and opposing philosophies are generally not accepted well. And I feel that by arguing for the death of the concept of God and the concept of religion, you're cutting out a huge portion of these alternate viewpoints. And personally, I feel like at this time in history that is just simply not what we need. That's all I have to say, so thank you.
I'd like to that speech, and because we're running slightly short on time and we need to finish up and have the concluding speeches as well from the formal opposition and proposition, I'm going to be having 2 more speeches, both in opposition and proposition, and I'll be cutting down the time on those to 4 minutes each, if that's okay. So with that, I'd like to invite a speech in favour, a propositional motion that this House would welcome the death of God. Anyone in opposition? Yes.
This is information system. I wasn't actually going to stand, but seeing as no one else did, might as well. I jotted down a few points. They're all a bit kind of, you know, what's the word? Pardon? Haphazard. Yeah, thanks. So, just a few things I jotted down. So just say what Father Tony Flannery said there at the start. He mentioned how the Bible should be read as sort of an interpretation. You know, for example, like the world was created in 6 days really means that the world was, you know, created by God or whatever. But I'm just going to look up a few Bible references, if you're interested. No, we can all hold hands or something. I don't know. So Deuteronomy book 22, okay, verse 11. Do not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together. I think I'm just violating that at the minute, like, you know. How would you interpret it that, you know? How would you sort of, I don't know. Okay, there's another one here. Let's see. Verse 28. If a man, this is a little bit obscene. Okay, so if a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver. Just think about that for a second.
Point of information?
Yeah, go on.
What's that in euros?
Yeah. I wondered the exact same thing, you know. And continue then. He must marry the young woman, for he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. Like, the Bible is supposed to be the sort of peak of morality or something, you know, that, you know, comes from a God who's all knowing, and, you know, he knows what's best for all of us. 2 seconds, I'll just finish my point. But this, like, even someone who isn't very intelligent can figure out that this is not the most moralistically superior idea, is to, you know, have a married man or some man rape a woman who's unmarried and then pay the father of this woman money and then marry her, you know. That, just think about that for a second, you know. Like, that's in the Bible, and people worship this book. Billions. They worship it, like. So yeah, go on.
Sorry, Mary Haskett, second year arts. I feel like with the Bible, obviously you could like pick and choose to support your argument or not support your argument. Literally 90% of the Bible. I would ask you if you had read if that's the Old Testament or the New Testament, and whether or not you've read the Bible start to finish. Like, literally, a lot of the Bible you have to take into context. So I would just be kind of wary of saying things like that. Obviously, that Bible.
We'd ask the POIs be kept to 15 seconds at most.
I don't agree. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, there's always that argument of, oh, take it into context of the time. You know, they weren't very, you know, they didn't have very in-depth ideas of what's right and what's wrong. But, you know, they claim that the Bible was written by God. It's the impeccable word of God. You know, like, this isn't the God I want to worship if this is the sort of stuff he encourages us to do. You know?
Point. You're only restricting yourself to Christians, though, and Jews. There's no mention of that in Hindu texts, or, you know, Islamic texts, yeah, but you're limiting yourself to 1 or 2 religions, maybe 3, when that's not everyone's meaning of God.
Bible's not written by God.
So it's written through, you know, he works in mysterious ways to have someone like John, Paul, Peter to write a few letters to the Corinthians or whoever. You know, he works in mysterious ways to sort of make that happen.
I just want his point of information.
Concept.
Okay. I know you hit your hammer 2 times. I have a few other points, but I won't make them, so. Okay, thanks guys.
I'd like to speak that speech and advice speech in opposition to the motion that this House has welcomed death to God. So we have a lot more of those. Yes.
Thomas Creamer, Final Arts. So the problem with debating about the idea of God in context of human society is that basically the idea of God or like beings or presences in daily life has been basically a fundamental feature of almost all human societies as far as any academic research is possible. So what that means is that when we're debating what effect the belief in a godlike being has on a society's morals, a society's ability to progress scientifically, there's a lot of factors involved in human society besides just the belief in God. So it's hard to say whether or not certain social attitudes or backwardness has anything to do with that one idea, or if there's not just like a million other cultural and social explanations for it. To demonstrate what I'm talking about, for example, because one of the main proposition arguments I was brought up was in relation to bigotry, how belief in God can be used to justify that in certain situations, such as with the LGBT community. The thing is that you could probably say that homophobic bigotry, as well as a general anti-women attitude, misogynistic, forgot the word, could be probably traced back to the establishment of the idea of patriarchy in many human societies, which could probably be traced back to when humans change over to landholding practices that stress the importance of a head of a certain piece of land or territory or cattle or whatever, as well as about the importance of establishing lines of inheritance rather than what type of belief system that society may hold, given which we probably could figure out just from the fact that all sorts of bigotry has existed in many human societies with various different levels of beliefs for generations. Similarly enough, we probably could say the same thing with science, because okay, I'm not sure why belief in God is necessarily a negative towards being able to participate in scientific research. I think that's news to many to a lot of Muslim and Catholic students, for example, studying scientific courses in Galway, who are pretty well capable of doing scientific research. So, I don't think that's really stopping them too much. But basically though, there's just trying to pick apart society and all the cultural influences in this manner is going to be tricky because it's so mixed and it's so varied. Therefore, that's why I think having this debate is probably going to be difficult for those reasons. There's probably more I could go into that subject, but I think that just stating how complicated it is and how many other factors you could allege causes bigotry or whatever, you probably can join the dots yourselves. I will just finish though in relation to what has been said previously about the Catholic Church, about it being, evil organisation or whatever that's bringing people away from God. Well, I mean, over half the world's population, of the world's Christian population, are either Catholic or else affiliated with various Orthodox churches that are nearly as old as Catholic Church itself. And in comparison to the other remainder of Christianity, which is spread over tens of thousands of different smaller Protestant churches. So, just basically, could 1.2 billion Catholics could possibly be wrong?
Point of information?
No, thank you.
I'd like to speak to that speech and invite one final speech from the floor in proposition motion of this House, proposition motion of this House of welcome death to God. Any final speech? One, okay. Then, is there someone in the front there? Sorry, I made a speech already unless you want to make another one. Very quick one. Okay, so with that then we move on to our final opposition speaker from the bench. So do we have anyone who got proposition motion? Yes.
John Carroll, First Arts. So first I'd like to say about Atheist Ireland, I'd like to question why they have an organisation that doesn't, and their thing is that they don't believe in God. It seems to me as silly as having a group that, and their thing is they don't believe in ghosts or they don't believe in witches. Well, I don't see the point of that, but it's really because what it is secularist Ireland, and what they're promoting is their secular ideology and their secular religion. And they have their own faith and their own dogmas that are believed on faith, and their own rules of shall do and shall not. And like, it's just, they only believe in these materialist things, these things that can only be proven by science, and anything kind of transcendent or spiritual, they say, no, you know, that's fake. And but like, when you kind of see, as you're talking about love and all these things that, you know, they can't be explained scientifically, and there's so much that can't be explained scientifically, then you say, you know, maybe there is something more than this. And just the way the world is so kind of particular and so peculiar, like it could have been made in so many different ways, and why is it this way? But you know, I don't see any other explanation. We don't know, everything is so kind of hard to understand. But then no thanks. But then religion gives an explanation for these things that I don't really see from Atheist Ireland. But anyway, and then like looking at the history of Ireland, we've had the Catholic Church, and they couldn't be suppressed by 700 years of oppression from England and the penal laws and all that. But suddenly, so recently in the last 20 years, we seem to have thrown it out the window, and you kind of wonder, how did this happen? So then I started looking into it, and I was going to the religious bookshop in town on Tubernua, and they you know, reading just Catholic stuff and bits of the catechism and just learning about what they really say. And you know, it's very interesting and very different to what you think Christianity and religion is about, because more often than not we just get this kind of literalist, reductionist caricature of American Protestantism, and you know, that's not the way the Catholic Church is. It's much more than that, but that's obscured from us. We can't see it. For example, there seems to be a lot of question tonight about like evil and why do bad things happen, but that's a very basic thing that Catholics explain and Christians explain. It's original sin, because we turned away from God at the beginning of time. We turned away from His love, and now things don't make sense and bad things happen. And it's a lot more than that, like, but it's a good explanation, and I haven't seen it anywhere else. Another reason, I don't want to offend anybody, like, but about the homosexuality, and they think we've seen this one line in the Bible that says it's an abomination and that's why we hate it, or something like that. But that's not the truth. It's because the church has this beautiful, very large and intellectual vision of what human sexuality is for and about the marriage. And it's so much more than that. And it's not, you know, simplistic or anything. And some of the greatest minds in history, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and Benedict XVI and all these guys, have discussed this stuff and have written on it, and you can't just dismiss it like that and think, you know, we know so much better now in the 21st century. You know, I don't think it's that simple. And there's kind of, obviously, without God, how do we make decisions about, say, abortion, or say about relationship? How are we meant to interact with each other, and how should we behave? How can we have a morality without God? It's just these kind of utilitarian ideas about how we should treat each other. But like, why should we do that? Like, is there any meaning other than maximize pleasure and minimize pain? And we were all talking about God, about love and relationships earlier. But you know, the one thing I missed was that God is love. That's the central thing about Christianity. But we seem to bump over that. You know, and this whole thing about relationships is, you know, very covered, but we don't see that. And when you don't believe in God, and when there's not kind of the tempering force of Christianity, then this kind of despotic kind of thing can get out of control, like you were saying about how you don't want to kill animals. Like, if you don't believe in God, then you can say, oh, humanity, we should just go extinct. Or, you know, there's no such thing as gender and it's all socially constructed. These things can just kind of get out of control. But anyway, you know, I'm probably not allowed to say that. But we'll go on. But anyway, we were talking about the divine energy and how all God is some very vague force, and we've no real idea about it. And I just want to say, although I wouldn't say something kind of literalist about Christianity, I think it's much beyond that, and it points to a greater, something greater that words can't explain. But I don't think it's that simple that all religions kind of agree on something, one like essential core truth. I don't think that is true. But it's really bizarre. It's so absurd what the church says about.
That's what you mean to wrap up the speech.
Okay. Anyway, well. Okay, I was going to say how the Eucharist, they say that Jesus is actually there in communion, and it's just something I just ask you to kind of look into what the church really says, because it's very interesting, and it's very, you're not exposed to it really, because we're kind of submerged in this. Yeah, I'm closing up now. We're overthrown by this kind of liberal secular tide, and I just say there's something else out there, and I just advise you to have a look at it before you make up your mind. Yeah, I'm wrapping up now, because at the centre of this atheist thing is just despair. It says there's no meaning, we can never know anything, we can do whatever we want.
Finish up your speech.
I am, but at the centre of Christianity is hope, and that there's a higher meaning, and so that's it.
I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions this evening for what was both contentious and a great debate overall.